Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. Fog City, a ghost story. Told by McFatMike from a story told to him by Mr. Johansen, a wonderful scoutmaster. This is an old legend I heard from my scoutmaster, who had lived a long and exciting life. It's an old but favorite campfire tale, a legend I've only partly been able to verify. This is how I heard it, with only a few storytelling embellishments. The little factual information I've gleaned will come at the end. Mr. Johansen, the scoutmaster, claimed he was aboard a battleship in Pearl Harbor, the Arizona, I think, and survived by climbing out of the smokestack. As he would put it, every so often some would ask him if that was the strangest thing that had ever happened to him. As we sat around a campfire, I remember a strange look in his eyes, and he answered, "No." And then he'd tell us the tale of Fog City. Long ago, he said, he'd been working with a lumber company, exploring the mountains. His job was to report on pure stands so they could log them. He traveled with a partner because traveling alone was a good way to die. Even so, it was lonely work. And so when they met the Mexican shepherds, they readily agreed to set camp with them for the night. As night began to fall, however, Mr. J noticed the animals were getting restless. His friends saw it too. The Mexicans seemed very nervous, and as they spoke in Spanish, they suddenly started to break down camp. One came to them and said, "We have to move. Right now, please." Despite the fact that it was almost dark, and building camp isn't easy, they agreed, if only to humor them. But as they settled in for the second time, Mr. J turned to them and asked, "All right, what was it about that place? Why did we have to move?" They stared uncomfortably at each other for a moment. Then one spoke. "Behold, even the animals can sense the evil of that place." And with that, he told them the tale of Fog City. If the town had a real name, it had been lost to time. Even the ghosts called it Fog City now. But back then it was a small mining town, nestled in the Washington Mountains. More exactly, it was two towns. The mine itself, on the top of the hill, where the miners lived 6 days out of the week. Down below was the town proper, which had things like a general store, the jail, and of course the only bar. Every weekend the miners would descend with their pay, ready to pitch a liberty. Now, legend says the bartender was a good sort. To help the miners from overspending, he would hold their money for them and make sure they never overspent in his bar. This made him into the town's unofficial banker, as well as bartender, and he was very well liked by most. No one had much information on the three strangers who wandered in, Everyone thought that they were just miners, hard on their luck. But the truth was worse. One of them had realized that a bar could never be as secure as a bank. So they made plans. Soon after the bartender and the town drunk got into one of their famous arguments, they struck. That night they broke in and killed the bartender, robbed the place, and left more evidence to frame the town drunk. To further throw off suspicion, they hid the money in case they were searched. Their plan worked. The next day the town drunk was arrested, tried, and set for execution. As they took him out to the hanging tree, strung him up, they asked him for some last words. A strange look came into his eyes. Some say it was a final moment of sobriety, but others were unnerved by his calm. "I tell you again, I did not do this, but the guilty ones will pay." He pointed a finger. "See that crack in the mountains? When the criminals come, the fog will roll in, and justice will be seen." They hung him, of course. Who listens to a drunk? After the trial, the men calmly packed up and headed out of town. By some odd coincidence, not far from where Mr. J would try to camp many years later. That night, 2 of the men stayed back, while the third went back into town to retrieve the lost loot. As they watched the crack in the mountain, the fog came slowly rolling in. That man was never heard from again. The other 2 were sure he'd simply run with the money, but a new check showed it was untouched. The only oddity was on the hanging tree. Instead of one fresh rope burn from the hanging the day before, there were 2. The men were even more frightened, and so that night one of them snuck back into town. The last man, as he stood there, saw the fog start to roll in. Needless to say, the second man was never seen again. At this, the third man panicked and fled. The story emerged sometime later in a bar in Seattle. Some drunk ranting about treasure in Fog City. But to this day, no one dares seek the treasure. Others have tried, and the few who returned only had one thing to say. The fog came rolling in. Okay, now for the less prosaic version. I've heard this story for years, but I've never been able to verify much of what Mr. J said. He said he'd been to the place where Fog City was. It was accessible by dirt road, possibly to this day. I can say he took a bunch of scouts there once. Some of them confirmed that much. But they said they saw the fog rolling in and decided to run. What I do know is this. Mr. Johansen put the location of Fog City in the Cascades. More specifically, he put it as not far from Crystal Mountain Ski Resort, and on the western side of a small mountain route called Scout Pass, which is enough to pin it into the South Cascades. To further confirm that there's something to this tale, there is even a very small hiking trail called Fog City. That's enough to nail down the approximate area. Sadly, that's all I can find. So let's see what Reddit can find. I'm wondering what others have heard of this story. How many variations are there? And does anyone have any more hard information? on the town. So quoth this raven. My darlings, if you like this story, please let McFatMike know. And if you've heard of this story, please let him know that so he can find more information on this mysterious town. My darlings, please give this video a like so I know you enjoyed it. Please subscribe and ring the little bell to come up and see me if you haven't done so. And if you comment, I will do my best to comment back. Bye-bye, my darlings.